Tonight's lecture actually rests at the intersection between behavioral science and policy, and specifically addresses the decision-making in the context of scarcity, especially poverty. For those of you who are students at Fordham University or faculty at Fordham University, this will sound very familiar. It's the tone of the work that we do each and every day, thinking about issues from a new lens to support social justice. That's what we're about. This is a really important topic for New York City, for New York State, and the nation. About 15 million children in the U.S., that's 1 in every 5 children, live in poverty. About 1 in every 8 adult in the U.S. lives in poverty. In New York, living in poverty very quickly leads to homelessness. We know homelessness for children can be related to emotional and behavior problems, health problems, social mobility, school dropout, and low academic performance. We know that poor families often have to make very, very tough decisions, whether it's better to sleep on the street or in a shelter that may not be safe, whether health care is more important than food at a given moment. Poor families have to decide where to enroll students in school if they have no fixed permanent address, if clothes for school are more important than food on the table in the evening, if a fixed address is more important than clothing, and the list goes on and on. These weighting decisions have significant consequences on the poor and homeless. And here to explain about that decision making and its economic impacts are tonight's speaker, Dr. Eldar Shafir. Dr. Shafir is a professor of behavioral science and public policy at Princeton University. He gladly took the train up to see us today. As you can read in your program, he's also the co-founder and scientific director of Ideas 42, which is a social science R&D lab that's actually located here in Manhattan down on Wall Street. You can read the rest of his bio in your program, so I'm not going to read that to you. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is to check your cell phones right now. Make sure the ringer is off. We are live tweeting the session, so if you want to follow us, it's at, the address is?
GSE on or G, so it's GSE Education. Fordham GSE Education.
Fordham GSE Education, if you want to follow us on Twitter. Dr. Shafir will make his remarks for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we will take questions from the audience. I want to stress we're taking questions from the audience, not statements from the audience. We will have 2 microphones, one on each side of the room, and if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand. The person with the microphone will come over to you. We just ask you to identify your role. Whether or not you're a student, a faculty member, an official from somewhere else in the city, before you ask your questions. After the Q&A period, then we hope that you will stay. We do have a reception immediately outside the auditorium after the presentation where you can continue the conversation. And so with that, please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Thank you. Is this on? Good. Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here. And I want to cover quite a bit. What I want to do is I want to start sort of giving you my 2-minute kind of Psych 101, sort of the behavioral perspective that informs a lot of the work that we do. I recognize this is a somewhat interdisciplinary crowd. Some of the basic behavioral stuff will be natural to some of you and sort of exotic to others, so I'll do it quickly. I want to talk about 2 specific issues that come up in behavioral research: the power of the situation and cognitive limitations, because they're going to serve us in some of the other work I described. Then I want to focus on the psychology of scarcity, what we've been researching, myself, a close colleague and friend, and several postdocs and students, trying to understand the psychology that emerges when people don't have enough of an important resource, and then discuss a bit implications for policy and thinking, etc. I'm open to discussion. So that's the plan. Now, when I do behavioral, it's very hard for me to do any of it without going back to very classic studies. Many of you will have seen some version of them that entered popular culture. I want to give you my 2-minute rendition of them because it serves, again, well to set up the stage. So these are European psychologists who come to the US during or after the Second World War. They're sort of obsessed with understanding the German mind, what made the Germans do the things they did. We now know there's nothing German about it. It's the machinery, the warfare behind the eyes and between the ears. And that, I think, to some extent, changes the way we think about the social sciences. So, again, some of you will have seen some version of this. This is Stanley Milgram, who works at Yale. He does a study on obedience. He invites middle-aged men to come to the lab in the basement of the psych library. They think they're being assigned at random to being a teacher or a student, but in fact, all the subjects will be teachers right there. The student is actually a confederate, is an actor. He's working for the experimenter. He's attached to electrodes right there. And then after they meet, the subject goes to the other side of the partition, and the experiment begins. The experiment, which is sort of irrelevant, is about compared associates. So the subject teaches the student house, banana. Later, when he says house, the student's supposed to say banana. If he gets it right, bravo, we move on. If he gets it wrong, he gets a slight electric shock. And there's a machine. Every time you give a shot, the lever stays down, so you know it's the last one you gave. And you get progressively higher as the experiment proceeds. You give higher and higher shocks. Now, this is very carefully choreographed. So at 70, 90, 110, there's kind of grunts, and they get louder. At 150, the student, the actor, screams, "Get me out of here, I told you I have heart trouble," which he happens to mention when they first meet. And then it goes on. At 270, there's massive screams of agony. This is available on PBS. You can actually see the originals. And then at 330, there's silence. So if you say house, nothing comes back after the guy screamed and told you he has heart trouble. 340, 350, 360, 370, up to 450, if you choose to proceed for about 13 or 14 questions. You pose a question, nothing at all comes back. That's the way it's set up. You can have a close-up of all this. Why would anybody do this? Because there is a distinguished gentleman you saw in a white robe working for Yale University. He seems very confident, knows what he's doing, and he insists that it's important for the study to keep going. And that's basically the entire source of pressure. Now, Milgram was a very brilliant experimenter, had another important insight, which was to ask people. He gave people much more detail than I just gave you, a full story, a full description of the whole study, and asked them to predict what will people do. So we have the full data. We know that in the 70s in the northeast of the US, everybody predicted disobedience in the study. The average was that people would stop cooperating about 135. That's when the grunts get a little bit louder. Nobody predicts anybody will go above 300 except for the psychiatrists, the experts in human behavior in the Northeast, to recognize that 1 in 1,000 will be a sociopath. So that's the data. What Milgram finds is that 65% of all the subjects are sociopaths, and that everybody goes above 300. Now, those of you who've taken social psych, we can easily spend the rest of the semester on just this observation. We know this is a discovery about human behavior. We know people didn't understand it. Milgram, in his correspondence with the NIH, is baffled. He planned to show the opposite. He planned to show that Americans are nothing like what we left behind in Europe. He then goes to Bennington College, which is sort of the bastion of leftist liberalism in the 70s, and that looked worse than Yale. He can't get rid of it. And he's blown away. It's really something we did not realize. So a lot of what I'll talk about is really about the power of the situation and our tendency not to get it. Which is, again, it's kind of to me, it's the major theme of what we've learned in the social sciences in recent years. And I'm going to try to convince you that it's very, very important poverty, because poverty is a massively powerful context, and we don't get it. So that's going to be part of the story. Now, when I talk about a context being powerful, we don't need to electrocute people. It could be shelves in a supermarket, it could be arrangement in a classroom, it could be how corporate headquarters is arranged. Any sort of small nuance in context we know can alter behaviors in ways that we fail to anticipate or to appreciate without having the right data or the right research. So there's a couple of, in recent years, during the era of nudge and other work in policy, we know that small nuances can make a big difference. This is familiar, some of you may have seen this table, it got a lot of press at some point. This is a table that appeared, 15 years ago, that basically gauges a percentage of drivers in different European countries who are willing organ donors. Okay, so what you see here, 7 countries average 94% of drivers are organ donors, and 4 countries average about 14%. The Netherlands is a complicated case, and we'll not get into it now. Now, if you look at the countries, it's Netherlands on one side, Belgium on the other, Germany on one side, Austria on the other. What's doing? What's doing is that the blue countries are opt-out. Unless you opt out, you're a donor. And the yellow countries are opt-in. Unless you opt in, you're not a donor. Transaction cost is signing the back of your license. It's trivial. We're not talking about buying cereal here. We're talking about your body, what your family does with your body, your values, your religious attitudes. It's like a big decision. And nothing happens, just signing the back of your license. And again, we know that it's not a strategic thing. We have data. Countries that woke up in the morning, saw this table, and switched the default. They just failed to take seriously the idea that having people sign will change the country in which you live. And this has become, in discussions of policy, behavioral policy, this is known as sort of benign paternalism, because if you're a paternalistic leader of a nation and you have to set it up, you realize if you're responsible, this is not a neutral decision. You have to decide which way you do it. You do it opt in or opt out, which will change the lives of many people. This happens to be a relatively easy case because everybody, both yellow and blue, prefer to be blue. So you know what to do if you're a responsible leader. When it comes to defaulting people into retirement savings and other things, it gets tricky. But we now know that makes a big difference. This is what you eat. This is a 1960 plate. This is a 2009 average American plate. Remember, you have to do pi r squared, so there's a lot more pasta you're getting on the right than on the left. And it changes how people eat. And again, the important thing here is that, what you eat is sort of important. You don't spend a lot of time computing the average spaghetti on your plate. You're having a good conversation with somebody, and you just eat what's there. And we know now it makes a big difference. This actually blew me away. This is from the CDC. Literally, when you order a burger in the street today, you eat exactly 3 of your grandmother's burgers. So when you have lunch, you have 3 of your grandpa's lunches, which is kind of amazing. There's a competition going on between burger providers, and we are sitting back having a discussion, eating 3 lunches every time we have a lunch. And this is something that, policymakers are taking more seriously. And again, it's all small contextual nuance because we're designing things, intentionally or not, that completely alter how people drive, what they eat, etc. Many of you know about FAFSA. It's the most generous benefit that the American government gives to its citizens. It's going to be many thousands of dollars to go to college. Take-up among FAFSA eligibles is about 1/3. So you're giving a lot of young Americans, not just a lot of money, but a lot of money that can actually alter their lifetime earnings and their experience. And take-up is 1/3. Why is that? It's a complicated set of questions, but one answer seems to be that this is the form. Now, this is the form. Of course, somewhere in there, apart from the fact that half these questions are incomprehensible, you're also told that you're answering under the penalty of perjury. So if you misrepresent anything, you're facing trial. The whole thing is very badly done. Now, people have looked at this, and what they did is the purple is the ongoing take-up and matriculation of FAFSA recipients. What they do then is they come to you and say, maybe it's an information question. So they come to you and they say, we checked your income, we checked your parents' income, we know you're eligible. It's official, you're eligible, here's the form. What happens? Nada, nothing happens. Version number 3, we know you're eligible, we know you can get FAFSA, here's the form, let's fill it out together. And when we do that, actual matriculation in FAFSA in college goes up 25%. So we know now it's not just having the information, it's having somebody at minimum wage, which is a lot less than we spend trying to advertise this, simply helping you get through the obstacle of this complicated form. And again, this is a contextual nuance. If we simply design it so that people, when they get a horrible form, also get somebody trustworthy, knowledgeable for half an hour with them, it literally changes the trajectory of their lives in ways that we just fail to appreciate until then. Lots of beautiful work from people. This is David Lakeson and his colleagues at Harvard. People basically get a job, and when you get a job, we say to you, welcome, we're going to default you into 2% retirement savings, Here's a phone number. You're free to call anytime you want, 24/7, and increase or diminish the amount you get defaulted into retirement savings. Other people in the exact same firm on other days, when they enter, you say, welcome, we'll default you into 5% retirement savings instead of 2. Here's a phone number. Feel free to call anytime and change it. For many people, this is one of the biggest decisions they'll make. And what you're seeing here is that these are people who are working in the same office. They play ping pong together. They meet in the water cooler every day. And those who have been defaulted into more savings are going to retire a lot richer than those who have been defaulted into less when all you have to do is pick up the phone. A little bit like the organ donation story. But basically, we're seeing more and more where nuance and contextual design make an enormous difference. This is probably my favorite. This is a glow cap. It's a $15 plastic capsule that complains if you don't open it at the time to take the medication. But complains, I mean, it lights up, it screeches, it sends you an email and calls you on your cell phone saying, open me in time. And the estimate is in places like HIV positive, where you have it taking the medication 70% of the time is not 70% good, this could have a decade life expectancy effect. Just, you have the accessibility, you just life interferes, you forget, and this is a constant reminder. So this is the work in behavioral policy that has to do with designing context in ways that help. This, if you can see well, sort of captures the intention-action tension that we all know. And the question is, how do you design context better than this? So if you're North Korea, it turns out you can do this. But in the US, that's not so acceptable. So the question is basically, how do we design context to do better? And now when I move to poverty, what I'm going to tell you is now I'm going to say the poor. But every time I say the poor, by the way, it's a totally ridiculous, vulgar term. Nobody knows exactly what that means. Some people are poor here by some accounts, and others, some of us were and were not. So I'm going to use it in a very vulgar way, but you kind of know what I mean. In the world of the poor, the context is often very complicated and uncooperative, and I want to focus on that because that's going to be the topic for the next half hour. So when you look at when I came from this behaviorally informed perspective and looked at poverty, what you see is that in many areas of life, the poor behave badly. So if you look at health, we've developed many important medications today. All that stuff is people to adhere to taking medications on time. There's a lot of work about the failure of adherence. The poor are the worst culprits. They adhere to the medications less than the rich, even keeping constant access and liquidity constraints. If you move from the world of Western health to weeding in developing countries, weeding your field is a simple act that increases your income significantly. Turns out, work and development finds that farmers who are poor weed their fields less than richer farmers next to them. Parenting, when there used to be Barnes & Noble, now you have to go to Amazon, but there's dozens of books on how the poor are inconsistent parents, not attentive to their kids, all kinds of critiques of how the poor parent their children. And in finance, it's infinite, all the supposedly bad decisions the poor make, including payday loans. I won't get into payday loans now, but we can talk about them during the discussion because it's a tragedy happening in American streets. And it's attributed to being myopic among the poor. We can talk more about that. So in the context that you look at the life of the poor, they seem to be behaving badly everywhere. And the question now is, what's doing? There's been a lot of important work. I'm putting here to emphasize it. I'm not dismissing this. So there's no doubt there are neighborhood effects, peer effects, education, that's all right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to abstract a bit from a lot of this and simply ask, what do we know about the psychology that occurs when you inhabit contexts of scarcity, not having enough, and what does it do to your behavior? And that's going to be sort of the way I frame this question. And along with Senator Mulanada, of course, friend and colleague and others, we eventually wrote a book that basically, I'm going to give you kind of the précis of it, kind of the quick summary of the book. Basically, the argument is that contexts of not having enough generate their own psychology. That psychology is basically one where you're spending all your cognitive resources juggling not having enough of the thing you don't have enough of. And when you're juggling not having enough, there's just less mind left for other things, and it makes complicated and bad things happen. That's going to be basically the story. So the contexts of scarcity generate their own psychology, and when you put that psychology in context of scarcity, that's very bad. Because you're inattentive, you're doing things less well, etc. That's going to be the story. Now, we use a metaphor that some people like, so I'll tell you very briefly. Basically, think of going through life with a suitcase. Some people have that's not your budget. Some people have a very large suitcase, and there's a lot of slack in it, it's easy. Others have a very tightly packed suitcase. So think of yourself going to Chicago for the weekend. You put your giant suitcase on the bed, you start throwing things in. You're not going to take everything that's in the house, so let's assume you throw things in diminishing order of importance. After 10 or 12 things, you're sort of done. It didn't take very long. It's already a close suitcase, you're ready. Now imagine the same thing with a very small suitcase. You start putting things in, by thing 4 or thing 5, you're running out of room. You now have to focus on your packing. You have to ask yourself, what do I take or what do I not take? You become an expert on what takes more room in the suitcase, the boots or the coat. Packing becomes a full-time thing. When you travel, trade-offs. If you travel with a very big suitcase with slack in it and something unexpected arises, you just about throw it in there. If you have a very small suitcase, you have to ask, what do I take out to fit this thing in? You're in trade-off thinking mode, etc. So we developed this more in the book, but that's sort of a bit of a metaphor. And so some people travel with a lot of slack in life, where packing is easy, and some it's very complicated. Actually, it turns out in computational theory, there's actual packing problems. Actually, the complexity of fitting things in a limited space, actually there's a sort of a technical formal treatment of some of this. I want to mention a couple of things before we proceed. So one, in the book, we talk a lot about the fact that the psychology of not having enough doesn't have to be only in money. So I'll give you a couple examples later, but the concept one is time. Some people in this room are time poor in ways that are very similar to the way that our subjects are money. So I have a very good friend who works very hard. He paints houses. He's done at 5. If I ask him, do you want to go to the movies? He says, what's the movie? Because he has a free evening. Many people in this room, if I ask you, do you want to go to the movies? You say, what's the movie? And what will I not do tonight that I'm meant to do tonight, I'm not do tomorrow? You're trade-off thinking modes. And so there's a lot of those kind of similarities. Temptations are an interesting one. Many of us have a lunch or a coffee with a friend. Some of the people who sell you coffee have to resist having a coffee with a friend. It's a temptation they must resist because they can't afford it too often. And interestingly, something similar happens in time. Some of the most successful Americans are so successful they can't afford spending any time with their kids. It's become a luxury because they don't have the time to afford it. So there's interesting issues that come up when you're time poor and they're quite similar. There's a lot of critiques about the poor who can't pay their debts yet they're spending money on small luxuries. Something very similar happens with time. If you have obligations you have to do, what are you doing? You're schmoozing with me, you should be finishing your work. Very similar psychology that arises. And in general, when you don't have slack, when you don't have enough, every small mistake, every lack of plan, every misplan costs you a lot more dearly. Both in time, if you have a very, very packed day and there's a traffic jam, your entire day collapses like a Jenga tower. If you're on vacation, it doesn't matter half as much. And same for paying a parking ticket. So I'm not going to get into it here, but there is a very similar psychology that arises when you're focusing on a thing you don't have enough of. The other thing that I want to talk about, and this actually the dean mentioned it a little bit, when you don't have enough slack, the problems that arise on a daily basis are really remarkably frequent and common and multivariate. So if you look at the work of the inner city poor, the American poor in general, a lot of stuff happens all the time. The kind of stuff that those who have money to pay for a forgotten parking meter or for an unexpected flat tire or anything else don't think about twice. For others, every unexpected little glitch becomes a complication. How do you now take care of things you had to take care of that you couldn't do before? And here is a point, as a moment to pause and tell you, when I talk about the psychology of scarcity and not having enough, it's not the poor, namely those below the poverty line we're talking about. We're talking about people who have a hard time finishing the month. And that's a much bigger number. So I want to spend a minute about when we count the number of poor. So we mentioned 1 in 5 kids is poor. About 46 million Americans are poor. This is just a way of talking about the number of people who are below the poverty line. The poverty line is sort of an accidental number that comes from sort of a lot of historical kind of glitches in American economic calculations, and it's not really relevant today, in the sense that you need a lot more than being above the poverty line to finish the month. Let me just give you an example. This is taken out of the Times. It's a specific context. So Angelique is a mother of 2 living in Charlotte, North Carolina. She She has an annual income of $7,500, well below the poverty line of $17,400. And so the government reluctantly gives her a bunch of little pieces of help, WIC, ITC, etc., bringing her to $18,800. $18,800 is above the $17,400, which is the poverty line for a mother of two where she lives, and so she's no longer poor. Now, another way to think about poverty is not the poverty line, but the living wage. And many organizations in the U.S. that compute the living wage, which is what's the amount of money you need to live a minimally acceptable life in the town and place in which you live. Okay, so that living wage, it turns out, many calculations, many organizations all agree, comes close to twice the poverty line. So Angelique, who now has 18,800, which is above 17,400, lives in a place where the living wage is $34,000. She's nowhere near having enough to being able to finish the month. And when I talk about the poor who are managing psychology of scarcity, she's clearly there. She needs 34,000, she has 18 or 19. She's big time juggling insufficient resources. And if you take these computations, it takes us from 46 million Americans to a little over 110 million. So a third of the nation are people who are not able to finish the month well. And it's their psychology we're talking about, not the destitute in the corner who are homeless, but a third of America who are teaching you, serving you food, driving your taxes and your buses, doing all the other things we do. It's a third of America who are in this predicament of not being able to finish the month. So it's a much bigger group. Now, one last footnote. When you teach about poverty, and when you talk about poverty in the U.S., there's always somebody who asks, what are you talking about? If you put these people in New Delhi, they'll be, rich. And I'm giving a minute to this because it's a profoundly silly idea, but I can see where it comes from. And before you think about it for a while, it sort of seems reasonable. So I just want to make sure we understand. Poverty is not having enough to live a minimally acceptable life in a time and place in which you live. Obviously, things change. To say to somebody today, look, you have running water. That was a dream 300 years ago, stop complaining, is not to understand what's going on. And this is sort of important because what happens, so there's a bunch of these. This is one recent one. You can see what they do here. So these guys count the percentage of the poor who have air conditioners, color TVs, if you can buy black and white if you wanted to, all kinds of other luxuries. The most recent one was the Heritage Foundation, which in 2011 again counted and described to us how many of the American poor have air conditioning and color TVs, and so we're running water. What's the problem? And this is interesting because when these things come out, they're always public, they're always reported in all the press, and nobody stops and says, okay, what am I supposed to do with this information? Is this supposed to tell me that they're living well? So what? They have air conditioning, they have toasters, so what? And so it's interesting because nobody comments except for sort of the deep commentators in the American scene. So Colbert says, this report proves that poor people are not living down to our expectations. If you still have the strength to brush the flies off your eyeballs, you're not really poor. Now this is Colbert's way of being vulgar, but it's exactly what the Heritage Foundation means. Somehow it's not supposed to impress us because you look better than the massively destitute, at risk people who are living in the worst places. John Stewart says, I never realized that poor had it so good. No wonder the middle class is pouring into their ranks in droves. And again, what's interesting here is if you look 350 years earlier, Adam Smith solves it very cleanly. And he says, it used to be the case that when you were a British laborer, you were not expected to work a linen strip to go to work. Now that you are expected to wear one, if you can afford it, you're poor. Period. So when I talk about the poor, I'm going to be very non-defensive about this. Poor means not being able to live the appropriate life in the place and time in which you live. So it's important to keep in mind, although they look better than in developing countries long ago, these are people having a terrible time finishing the month, and we're going to consider them juggling insufficient resources and exhibiting the psychology of scarcity. When you look at people who are packing very tight suitcases and trying to manage the scarcity, as you would expect, they're very good at knowing exactly how much things cost, what to do. They're paying a lot of attention. So a lot of work in marketing, for example, if you stand outside of a supermarket and ask people, can I see your receipt? and then ask them how much did you pay for the pasta, how much did you pay for the sauce, how much did you pay tonight in the supermarket, and then do the household income. The poor know exactly, and the rich have no clue. We stood in South Station in Boston, and when people came out of the train station, we got the household income and then asked them, when you get into a taxi in Boston, what does the meter read? What does the meter first read when we get into a cab? It's a fun question because clearly the rich take taxis much more often than the poor, but they're much less likely to know the answer. So the metaphor I'll leave you with is that when you're rich and you enter the taxi, you just sit back and enjoy the Charles River, and when you're poor, you check the meter. And that's what you find again and again. We've done a number of studies since then. There's a scenario where you go to the doctor, you're not feeling well, it's hypothetical. The scenario, the doctor gives you sort of bad news, but things will be okay eventually. It's a complicated scenario. And we ask people what comes to mind. We divide them by household income into rich and poor. The rich think mostly about the emotional valence of the message that they receive. The poor think about the emotional valence and the monetary implications. It's almost like a dichotic listening task. They can't just think about the emotional message, they also think about money. They can't focus on what the doctor is saying because money concerns are looming in the background. We invite subjects we put these beautiful pictures on the screen of just a beautiful forest or a beautiful beach. Invite subjects to sort of mind wander, to spend a minute in this forest. And while they're spending a minute in the forest, we flash words, classic lexical decision task. You're supposed to say, is this a word or not? And what you find is that the rich, when they're in this forest, identify the words leaf and tree faster, and identify money and dollars slower. The poor, although they're trying to get lost in this forest, it doesn't work for them. They identify money faster and can identify leaves and trees as fast as the rich. It's as if they're not able to let their mind wander for a moment in the forest. And there's many others we do. This is a very cute old study in memory research. The classic study is this. I say to you, father, brother, priest, boss, etc. I have not said the word man. And after I've given you a list of 10 of these and I ask you, did I say man? Many of you think you've heard man. What I've done is basically taken 10 words that are associated with man in your semantic network. I've never said man and you think you saw it, because the other words raise it. So we've done that, and it replicates beautifully. Rich and poor do the same thing. They think they heard man. But now we do another one. I say to you, bills, mortgage, house, car, etc. The rich don't think they heard money, but the poor think they heard money. So again, different ways of saying that when you walk around juggling insufficient resources and thinking scarcity in your mind, the way your mindset is set up, you will hear money when it's not there. It's hard for you to avoid thinking about money when you try not to think about it. It comes up when you hear the doctor, etc. It looms very large. And why is this important? That's the next thing I want to talk to you about. Apart from the power of context is your limited cognitive capacity. When your head is busy thinking about money, there is just less space left for other important things. We talk about tunneling. Think about it this way. This is kind of the best metaphor. You're driving in a massive storm. It's raining very hard. What do? You look 3 feet in front of you. You're not going to notice advertising. You're not even going to notice stop signs, potentially. All you're doing is looking myopically 3 feet in front of you. In some sense, when you are tunneling with insufficient resources, there is an urgent need. There is mortgage, or there is rent for Monday, there's food for tomorrow, there's a class trip for the kids. That's urgent. You're not going to think about retirement savings or potentially education savings for the kid in 10 years. That's peripheral. You know it's important, but it's not peripheral. Okay, so that's not the psychology. When you have limited bandwidth and you impose on it this worry with scarcity, you pay a price. So this is just to tell you, so cell phones and cars. You're going to read a lot about this in coming years. Right now, in several states of the Union, it's illegal to hold a cell phone in your hands. Everybody who does research on cell phones knows that's irrelevant. The hands have nothing to do with it. You just can't sell to the American public the idea that you cannot use a cell phone, so you convince them it's their hands. All the work on simulators finds that if you sit in a simulator on the phone, no hands held, free, hands are free, and you're on the phone in a simulator, your reaction time and your ability to detect the periphery equals somebody who's legally drunk. Just because that's the space you got. So the classic studies people have done is very simple. I asked this half of the room, please remember 2 digits for me. Please don't forget 17. And I asked this half of the room, please don't forget 7 digits, 17246335. While you're retaining this stuff in your short-term memory, what you find is that those that are keeping 7 digits are going to eat less well, are going to be less likely to remember to call their mother on her birthday, and are going to be less likely to notice a dude dressed as a clown riding a unicycle here on the corridor. Your head is busy. And basically the argument is that when you're juggling poverty, you're walking around keeping 7 digits in your head. And that's going to have an impact on what you can do and how well you do it. This is an amazing study, and we're in the School of Education, so it's perfect. These are sociologists who work in a school where, in Connecticut somewhere, where by random assignment, half the kids get a classroom in the quiet side of the school, and the other half of the kids are sitting near the train tracks, who are occasionally outside the window a train passes. Now, if I ask you, does a train distract? Yeah, a train distracts. How distracting is it? What these guys found is that in 5th grade, the kids near the train track are 1 year behind in academic performance. They then install soundproofing and the kids catch up. It's a massive effect. Now what I say to you is, imagine you're sitting in a totally quiet room, you have a nice library, trying to do your work, and preoccupations with your kids' lunch or rent going through your head, internal trains. They're going to have a very similar effect. You don't have to have the trains outside the window. These internal trains will impact your ability to think and conclude your thoughts and your work coherently. They have a very similar effect. We also describe in the book it's an amazing set of studies. If you go to nutrition conferences, everybody knows this study, and everywhere else, as far as I can tell, nobody knows this study. This is when the Allied forces in 1943-44 realized they're about to inherit a lot of starving people in European camps, they also realized that they don't know how to feed them. To feed the starving is a non-trivial task. It's they're coming back from mountain climbing. It's complicated. So they hired Ansel Keys, who was sort of the champion nutritionist at the University of Minnesota at the time, to study how to feed the starving. To feed the starving, he had to starve people. So he got a group of extremely impressive, young, highly educated men who were conscientious objectors. And because they're objecting to the good war, they're eager to help, and they participated. He starves them, not to death, but to massive discomfort. So the physical descriptions are horrific. These guys can't keep their arms above their heads long enough to wash their hair. They're so weak. They need pillows before they can sit down. There's no padding left, etc. But we focused on the mental stuff. So a lot of stuff in the documents that we describe about these guys. These are highly educated men, very impressive, and all they do all day long, although they're starving and really don't want to do this, is talk about food. They memorize recipes. They compare the price of food in different newspapers. They're all trying to become restaurateurs when they're finished with this study. They're food obsessed. And it's kind of interesting. At some point, the experimenters feel so bad, they show them a movie, and the testimonial from the subject is, they showed us a movie, I couldn't care less about the love scenes, I wanted to see the meals. That's all I can think of. And this is sort of an interesting case, because hunger, thirst, money, it's the same idea. That's where your mind is, both in terms of both thinking fast and thinking slow, both in terms of what you choose to talk about and what comes to mind immediately when you're just looking around. And so this is a study, not our study, a group of colleagues in the study where subjects are invited to come to the lab, not having had anything to drink for 4 hours, so they're very thirsty. By random assignment, half are given water, the other half are given pretzels. Not a good idea when they're thirsty. And now your task again, as before, is there's a word identification task. You have to identify whether these are words or not in English. And what you find is that those who had pretzels identify thirst-related words significantly faster than those who had water compared to neutral words where they're the same. So, as opposed to the guys who chose to talk about this stuff, this is half-a-second decisions. They're incredibly fast, and it's literally showing that when you're very thirsty, thirst-related words are just activated in the semantic memory and are prone to be discovered in 400 or 500 milliseconds. And this, of course, you have a prime. We did this amusing study. This is a study in California. Half the subjects are dieters, and the other half are not. Diet, by the way, there's a lot of work on it. It's very distracting. People who are dieting literally lose IQ from thinking about food. And so these are dieters, and half of them are dieters, half of them are not. And you see here, it's a classic word search. You have to find the words that are on this list. And notice that the odd number words are diet-related, so cake, donuts, sweets, etc. In the second condition, we'll replace the diet-related words with neutral words. Instead of cake, you have street. Instead of donut, you have picture, etc. Now, what we're going to do is look how long it takes people to find the same words. How long it takes you to find tree, cloud, which is the same in both conditions, as a function of whether or not the other words around you in this context are diet-related or not. If it's confusing, don't worry, it's going to become pretty clear. People who are not dieting, you don't get the effect. People who are dieting basically take significantly longer to find the word cloud when it's preceded by a donut than when it's preceded by a picture. Once you saw donut, it's just hard to find the next word. It's distracting. Okay, so when you're thirsty or hungry, your mind goes to those words, and it takes longer to go anywhere else. It's impacting your performance. And this led us to a number of studies. I'll give you the ones that kind of had the most impact. This is subjects we go to at the mall in New Jersey on a Saturday. We ask them to participate in the study. They agree. They sit in front of a computer. And we give them scenarios that describe everyday financial problems. Your car breaks down. It's going to cost X dollars to fix. How are you going to go about taking care of this problem? These scenarios come in two versions, called the manageable and challenging. The manageable version, the car is going to cost $150 to fix, which we know for most people on the mall on that Saturday is doable. The challenging version, the car is going to cost $1,500 to fix, which we know, from many other studies, about half the people in the mall would find an incredibly complicated thing to take care of. Okay, very challenging. So you get these scenarios, you think how you're going to take care of them, and to make things interesting, while you're thinking about it, we'll let you play some games, which happen to be classic cognitive psych tests of capacity. This is a cognitive control test. Basically, you're supposed to respond as fast as you can. The same side if you see a flower, the opposite side if you see a heart. It's a divided attention test. Okay? It's a classic, it's like a driving test. And this is the progressive matrices. So all of you, by the fact that you're here, I know for a fact have done this before. It's the fluid intelligence component of the IQ test. We do this in all the schools, job interviews. It's the most common component, measuring your ability to think in real time, what's the missing figure. It's supposed to be the closest we've ever come to being able to gauge people's ability to think, independently of whether they are Nobel laureates in physics or farmers. It's not perfect, but it's the closest we have, and it's very common. Okay, so we'll give you this, while you're thinking about these scenarios, we'll give you these driving and fluid intelligence tests, IQ tests, and we'll see how you do by function of your household income, whether you're rich or poor. It will all become clear. If you look at the cognitive control driving test, these are the rich. Whether they're worried about fixing the manageable or the expensive car, it doesn't make any difference. They do equally well on cognitive control. Okay? We look at the poor, the lower half income in the mall, which is very close to American poverty. They drive just as well as their rich friends when they're fixing the manageable $150 car, but they drive significantly less well when their mind is preoccupied with a car that's a major challenge. Okay, by the way, you get the exact same thing if you simply ask people to keep 2 digits in their heads or 7 digits in their head. When you keep the 2 digits, you'll be fine. 7 digits, you'll perform less well. Very similar. So when the poor, who with their minds less preoccupied, do just as well as their rich friends, they significantly drive less well, not with their challenge, but a complication that they cannot quite manage. If you move to the Ravens matrices, you see cognitive ability, IQ. The rich don't care which car they're fixing. The poor, when they're fixing the manageable car, are statistically insignificantly different from the rich. It's the same. When they're fixing the expensive car, they lose a lot of capacity. This is a Cohen's d of 0.9. It's near standard deviation. Basically, if you make basic assumptions about the distribution of the IQ test, just standard, so the normal distribution, these people lost about 13 to 14, near standard deviation, between 13 to 14 IQ points when they went from the manageable to the challenging financial scenarios. 13 to 14 IQ points in the school where my kids go on a qualitative scale takes you from average to borderline gifted or from average to borderline deficient. It's a very big effect. We know from other studies, not ours, if we kept you up all night, I mean, with M&M blasting in the background all night, you would be today about 9 IQ points less capable. So think of yourself sitting, taking an exam after not having slept all night. These guys who a minute ago were just as good as their rich friends are now feeling worse than that. That's the effect you get. Now, we did all the controls here, but these are American poor and rich. They're different creatures, different heart rates, different education, different health. There's a confound. It's all controlled, but still, the dream was going to do this within person, within the same people. It's not easy to find people who are rich one day and poor the other, but in the developing countries, it's a little easier. We ended up with sugarcane farmers. These are people, it's outside Chennai in southern India. When you're a sugarcane farmer, you basically farm all year and then you deliver your sugarcane and you get paid basically in one day. So these are people for whom at least 65% of their yearly income comes in one day. And because they fail to smooth, because they run the money too soon, these are basically guys who find themselves rich after harvest and poor before. So we run them on handheld devices, very similar to what we saw in the mall, in the fields of India 2 months before after harvest. I'm not going to get into the details, but if you look at error rates and reaction times, they're about 9 IQ points less capable during scarcity than during plenty. This is now the same person, same education, same health, same everything. So it's fully an effect. Now, I want to jump forward a little bit. What you find here is that dealing with scarcity, juggling poverty, is a full-time job that's challenging and depleting. And what's so interesting, and I'm moving kind of more to policy-related issues, instead of respect for this challenge, you get disrespected. And instead of help with this challenge, you get sabotage in our society today. And that's kind of the part that's a little bit less common of sight, but really kind of remarkable. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a lot of work on the disrespect that the poor get. So if you look across the world at stereotypes, and it's kind of a multidimensional plotting of where stereotypes fit, there are places where it's better to be a woman, or a Roma, or a Jew, or black, or other places. Universally, anywhere you look, the poor and the homeless are on the bottom left of this multidimensional scale. They're untrustworthy, unreliable, incompetent. That's how they're seen everywhere. And this has an impact not just on how we treat the poor, but how the poor feel about themselves. And there's a lot of work on this. We just did a recent study. I'll just give you a sense of it. This is like first impressions. So here is a face, and you see this face in 1 or 2 versions, this way or that way. And what we know is an independent group of judges agrees that this guy's shirt looks poorer than this guy's shirt, which looks richer. Now, this is not about race. This is a case where class trumps race. We have many faces of different varieties. This guy's shirt is richer than this shirt. And all we ask the subject, the only question is, how competent is this person? That's all. So you see the face in 1 or 2 versions. You only have to ask great competence. And here's some remarkable facts. First of all, notice this is when you're so good at perceiving faces. If I give you a face for a second, it sort of gets boring. This is half a second. This is 70 milliseconds is you sort of barely think you saw a face. And when you sort of barely think you saw a face, your rating of how competent he is exactly matches how you'd think after a full minute, a second. That's all you need. There's a lot of work on these first impressions. So this is when you saw the face with a poor shirt, and this is when you see the identical face with a rich shirt, and 2 points on a 10-point scale is a massive effect. So what we're saying here is that when you see somebody, the first 100 milliseconds, you've already decided whether or not they're much or less confident, depending on the nuanced shirt they wear. And we have a lot of data that after that, you never adjusted it. Okay, so this is very, very automatic, uncontrolled, immediate, and has a big effect. And again, the point that becomes very interesting on this research on the identity of the poor is not only do we disrespect, but they get it. And So there's a lot of issues on identity threat. You may have seen some work on identity threat among African American kids in schools, Claude Steele's type work, where basically the minute you convince them it's got nothing to do with race, they outshine the white students in the class, and until then they do as well. You do the same thing with financial capacity. We did this is a study we did in a soup kitchen in Trenton, where we asked people in the soup kitchen to come to a private room where they talked into a tape for a minute. The control condition, they simply described a recent meal. The experimental condition, they spend a minute describing a recent event that made them feel capable and proud. So you affirm them, a lot of work on affirmation. So you affirm half of them and you don't the other, and then you give them exactly the test that you've seen already. And these guys in the soup kitchen, having just been affirmed, they feel better about themselves, do significantly better on these cognitive tasks. And when you leave booklets on benefits, VITA sites, EITC, other benefits for which some of them are eligible, and you simply count how many of them have the audacity to take a book as they leave the soup kitchen. 3 times more people take the benefits package as they leave than are being affirmed compared to the control. So making people feel a little bit better for a minute actually is an impact. Now, look, this is the problem all throughout behavioral work. This will not last very long. I mean, we make this manipulation, they take the book, they leave the soup kitchen, they walk in the street, and they meet America again. So the problem here is how to make this persist, or how to have decisions made at that moment that have long-term repercussions. But if you can get them at that moment to sign up for FAFSA, that might linger later. But that's kind of a nuanced balancing act that you have to do. So you have people juggling insufficient resources, having a lot of identity issues in disrespect instead of respect, and obstacles. I mean, there's so many, I don't even know where to begin. These are just some books that I recommend to you. If you look at banking, if you look at the law, of course, if you look at addictions, if you look at the justice system, it's remarkable how much more difficult we're making the lives of the low income. Now, when I say it's remarkable, to make it simple, there's malice and there's naivete. The malice is not remarkable, it's boring and it's disastrous and I don't know what to do with it. But let's ignore for a moment the malice and look at the naivete. A lot of well-intentioned policymakers who just don't get it. They think when they see the people behaving badly, it's an issue of motivation, of capacity, of not caring enough. And so you start being punitive. You're going to teach them. And you even see this among the best well-intentioned people, that basically providers of benefits and non-for-profits who are devoting their lives to helping the poor. Very often they'll tell you, you gotta demand them to be their age because they're very responsible. Instead of saying, these are people who are managing unreliable transportation systems, lack of babysitters, bad sleep, have to be soft and accommodating and flexible, the interpretation is they don't look like they care enough, they're going to make them care more. So there's a lot of very complicated impulses that arise that are sort of misguided in a deep way. And so when you think about the psychology of conspiracy, a lot of interesting policy implications. Let me give you one. If you remember during Clinton, we introduced a new welfare law. The welfare law was that every American is entitled to up to 5 years of welfare receipt lifetime. Now, imagine, let's do a thought experiment. I say to you, this is a lovely afternoon. Thank you for coming despite the beautiful weather. If you don't mind, please send me a paragraph, some thoughts about this thought in 5 years. What do you do? So, 4 years, 11 months, 3 weeks, you do nothing. And then you say, oh yeah, that guy wanted a paragraph. When you give the poor in America who are tunneling on getting rent from Monday a threat that welfare receipt will stop in 5 years, what happens? Nothing. It's totally outside their tunnel. They're worried about Monday. They're worried about Tuesday. They're worried about food. The 5-year threat just doesn't enter their tunnel. And so, as some people were worried, what you found is that welfare recipients after 4 years and 8 months said, oh my God, I'm running out in 4 months, which was not the intention. And so, if you get the psychology right, how do you motivate? It becomes a whole art in itself. Either you do 10 half-year limitations, you have to send reminders, you have to do something that enters my tunnel, you have to do something, not some threat that lurks completely outside of my consciousness that awaits to destroy me in ways that I'm not aware of. It really changes how you want to conduct policy with an eye toward people who have this very limited tunneling and limited bandwidth. And it even has to do with how you provide messages. If I want to convince you to do something, what do I do? It's a lot of work on how I'm trying to convince you. I'm changing your opinions or your attitudes. And it basically ranges sort of from on one side, I need your central processor, I need you to pay attention to me. I need your full attention, I give you an argument, you weigh the pros and the cons, you decide if I'm convincing you, etc. On the other side of this continuum, you can be busy, I'm going to get to you subliminally. I'm going to put a poster on the wall, you're busy, I put a drink of a cola, you don't even know you saw it, you leave the room, you have an urge for a cola. That's the other. So I can get to you through central processor where you pay attention, or subliminally. Basically peripherally. Now the question is, what picture do I put on the wall? How do I get peripherally to you and create the urge to save for retirement? So it turns out nobody has discovered that picture yet. If you look at the attempt to convince people to save for retirement, it kind of looks like this. Yeah, you can't do it perfectly. You have to stop everything you're doing and pay full attention and basically get a mini master's degree in retirement savings before you know what you're supposed to do. Very complicated. Imagine instead I want to convince you to slow. I don't want you to pay attention like you do here. I want you to be busy doing other things, because if you pay attention, you know it's a stupid argument. And while you're doing other things and your head is busy, that's when I flash pictures of beautiful people, Italian villas, a gun or two in the US could be a good thing, and now you have an urge to smoke. And that has a real imbalance, because when people are overwhelmed and juggling insufficient resources and having limited bandwidth, some messages will not get to them, and others they'll be the ultimate audience. And it really creates real asymmetries in what messages you can get to people and how to do it. And so a lot of when we conclude this work, a lot of people talk about this sort of compared to basically cockpit design. You can't sort of you can't make people better pilots than they are after a certain point. What you do is you design a cockpit that allows for better flight. And I like this metaphor because in the US we're very obsessed with people taking responsibility. This is a good metaphor because clearly a good cockpit is only going to help pilots who are taking responsibility. They're not going to make it if they don't. And in some sense, if you look at the American citizen who's struggling with limited bandwidth and a lot of hardship, designing a cockpit that helps is much, much more effective than designing one that leads to failure. And again, what's so interesting is that many people in this room have a lot of help in the cockpit that we live in. We don't even appreciate it. Reminders and accountants and lawyers and gardeners and drivers, depends who you are, there's more and more. And those who need them the most don't have it. And when they finally get to a lawyer, it's a lawyer who they cannot trust. And when they get to an accountant, they get a ballooning mortgage. It's all a mistake. The last couple of thoughts. One, there's an interesting implication here for how you evaluate policy programs. So normally, the way you do it is the Treasury Department decides to introduce a new financial instrument to facilitate some people's lives, and they introduce this instrument. They wait a couple of years, and they go to see how people are doing financially. Here, the implication is a bit different, because the bandwidth I'm talking to you about, this very limited bandwidth that we have, it's the only one we got, and we use it to do our finances, remember to eat healthy, help our kids with their homework, etc. Now, notice what happens. If the Treasury Department introduces a financial instrument that makes my financial life better, one very natural thing for me to do is to say, thank you so much. Now I've devote less of my limited bandwidth to finances since you've just helped me make it better. I'll spend more time on my kids' homework. But that means that when Treasury Department introduces this financial instrument and come back 2 years later, the benefit is going to be not in my financial behavior, but in my kids' grades. And we don't look at it that way. And so there's a real way in which if people are dividing limited resources and allocated in different places, and you make one place easier, it's precisely why the improvement might take place elsewhere, not where you look. If what you do in life depends partly on people's behavior, you better understand people's behavior. If you make it up, you use your intuition, and you got it wrong, everything you do will not be well done. And so in a sense, this whole agenda is to understand really what motivates people, what drives them, what determines what they do, so that you can design policy instruments to help better, in light of what you've understood is motivating them and driving them. And that's not a trivial thing. I have a whole collection of bad psychologists. I'll just give you one example to finish. What's a bad psychology? So this is an emergency room in Canada. In Ontario, they have a big problem. The emergency rooms are filled with homeless people. And it's very uncomfortable. And it's obviously not appealing. And it's a good example because two of the doctors and the nurses are well-intentioned. And the decision is, look, Ontario is cold. We're giving cups of tea. If we don't stop this, the homeless will just take over the place. There's a problem. We just can't be nice anymore. So that's kind of what's motivating them for a long time. Until a group of Don Relmar, who's a wonderful physician and a dear friend, based on some interviews, they suspect there's something going on here, and they run a randomized controlled study where when the homeless arrive, half of them get assigned to the standard treatment as always. The other half are assigned to compassionate treatment. They get an intern who's attached to them and treats them super well, with great empathy, asks them how she can help them, what can she do, what's hurting them, etc. Very, very compassionate treatment. And then they follow up on this program, and what they discover is that those who got compassionate treatment are significantly less likely to come back to this or any other hospital in the province. And it turns out that if you're homeless and you have a non-life-threatening ailment, your knee hurts, you come to the hospital and you feel like nobody took care of you, you come again. Or you go to a different hospital. If you feel they did the best they could for you, nobody wants to go to the emergency room for a cup of tea. And so all this time, it turns out, these wonderful, talented, well-intentioned doctors did everything wrong. Because they had a simple assumption, not a crazy assumption, just happens to be a wrong assumption about what drove the homeless into the emergency room. And once they got it right, they were both nice and solved the problem. And so this is an example of where getting the psychology right can really, or wrong, can really alter your success in doing policy in ways that are not trivial. And finally, if you look sort of at the covenants that we've signed with you and other places, to the extent that we can understand something about how to do this, it's actually a moral and a legal obligation to try. And the idea that we know some places where the psychology is wrong and could be done better dictates that we do what we can to use it to improve people's well-being. So that's kind of the message. Thank you, guys.
Hi, my name is Akani Zusha. I'm a faculty member here at Fordham and a psychologist. So it seems like the basic point, the argument that you're making is that being poor taxes working memory, right? In some ways. And you mentioned like a cockpit. Like, what would that look? I mean, obviously, I would love to make every kid in New York City rich, but we can't do that. So, in terms of education, do you have what thoughts do you have to sort of change the education system so that it's that cockpit that you were talking about?
Look, the notion that your bandwidth is overwhelmed by preoccupation makes you work less well. Of course, that's not the rubric of the poor, it's the rubric of everybody. We know that if you had a big fight with your spouse or your partner an hour ago, you would be less smart here today. You'd have these internal trains. We know that if you leave a sick child at home in the morning and come to work, you're less good that day. So obviously it's true for everybody. The catch, of course, is if you're struggling with poverty, it's a chronic. You don't get vacation from it. It's a big difference. People who work too hard, go on a summer vacation, spend a week in the Caribbean, come back, they're refreshed. You don't get vacations from poverty. It's a constant, it's just much more frequent. So now what to do? Let's start off from the kids or from the parents. There is certainly evidence that kids do better when their parents do better. So there's actually work now in Chicago about, if you look at food stamp receiving families, compared to other kids in the same class not with food stamp receiving families, you discover that the kids with food stamp receiving families who come at the end of the cycle, they basically are running out of food, have more disciplinary problems than they do earlier in the cycle compared to other kids in the class. So you really can show that kids who come from families who are struggling do less well. And so let's push it for a moment from the kid, which I'm less of an expert on, to the parent. The kind of things you want to do is basically help them smooth the month. So look, I'm trying to avoid payday loans. A lot of Americans can't finish the month and go for a loan. We've designed a system that's a disaster because the payday loans are extremely expensive. So I don't know what you know about payday loans. I'm breaking. I'm going to talk 2 minutes about payday loans. Payday loan is something you have to be working to get a payday loan, to pay this. The chance that you will not repay is actually fairly low. You have to be working and you're running out of money and you need $200 before you get your paycheck. And you go somewhere and you get $200 and you owe them 2 weeks from now $250. The implied APR, the annual interest rate, is somewhere between 500 and 800%. It's insanely high. Now, if I can't finish the month and need 200, how do I get 250 next month? If I win the lottery, I'm okay, but if I don't, what do? I take a payday loan to pay back the payday loan. So the finding is that the average payday loan taker in the US takes between 12 and 15 payday loans a year. And another statistic, I don't know where it is now, but one that I saw some time ago, is if you took a random payday loan given in America today, 70% of it goes to pay the previous one. It just turned you into a money pot. You're just taking an expensive loan and paying back for not having anything. It looks very myopic, because what did you think you were going to do? We have data showing that Princeton students do it too. There's nothing about being myopic. It's just a right now that's the most important thing in the world. And why am I saying all this? Look, when I've worked for you for 3 weeks and I'm running out of money, you owe me 3 weeks of money. So when people go and get a payday loan, somebody owes them that money already. But instead of making them borrow it at enormous rates, imagine if instead of a month you gave me pay every week. Let's say. Now it doesn't solve all the problems because I make rent, but maybe big pay at the beginning of the month and then smaller pays every other week. These are questions that you have to, it's exactly the cockpit. How do I design it so that your income comes in a way that facilitates spending? EITC, for example, Earned Income Tax Credit, which for a lot of low-income people could be a big gift at the end of the year. At some point, the IRS introduced a system where you can actually split it. You say, okay, I'll take $2,000 now, we'll put the other $2,000 in savings. When I'm struggling with insufficient resources, that's way better than coming home one day with $4,000, because how long is it going to take me before I lose control of them? These are the issues. There's a lot of critique about inner city poor who are spending irresponsibly. And what do you see when you look at it is, this woman has debt and she bought her kids sneakers again. Now, it's really interesting if you look at that. So let's assume you're unbanked, which is quite common, and you finish the month and you have $70, and you go home. Now, we know from the literature, if you're living in relative poverty and you're unbanked and you come home with $70, it's a question of 5 minutes before your mother or your boyfriend or your sister genuinely needs the money. And they give each other money much more often than the rich. So if you have $70 at the end of the week, you can either take it home and have to give it, or you buy your child sneakers. It doesn't look so crazy anymore all of a sudden. But that's the cockpit, because if you had a bank account, a reliable bank account, not a kind of bank that, a lot of the unbanked are the way it used to be banked, and the banks are so mean and tricky that they stopped being banked. If you had a reliable bank, you could actually be banked, which makes life a lot better. Banks in America, by the way, let's assume you have $100 in your bank account, and you give 5 checks, 4 $20 checks, and 1 $200 check. Okay? What the bank could do is pay your 4 $20 checks, and then the last one there's no coverage. What the bank in fact does is it pays first a $200 check, so you bounce 5 of them, and that costs you $200. It's completely criminal. It's shameful. Totally legit. That's how they arrange it. You bounce the most you can, not the least you can, with enormous repercussions for your finances. For a while, they offered you to pay your credit card bill on a Sunday and then penalize you because it wasn't there on time. You wouldn't believe it. So this is all how to design done with either malice or naivete. And if you designed all this a little bit better, to some extent, the parents of these children would have more food on the table and still live better. It's not a full solution, but it's a beginning. And then if you look at the other stuff I mentioned here about, you have a traffic violation and they want you to pay an amount you cannot pay and if you're in jail. For the kid who's probably went to jail because he, turned on a red light, that's a very big distraction. So there's a lot of stuff along those lines, some of it more trivial, some of it less, but would simply facilitate the management, the juggling that's imposed on those who are starting the most.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm actually a master's student in the clinical psychology program. And I was just wondering if you kind of talked about it a little bit near the end, but could you speak more to how something like subjective social status could possibly play out in both the research and in policy in this sort of matter of scarcity?
So I don't know all the stuff. I don't know, I'm not an expert in subjective social status. The stuff on identity threat is the one that I do with the most, and that's one version of it. We just, in a class of residents this morning, we were discussing this intuitive entitlement. There are kids in the class who are immensely entitled. It's kind of comical, it's kind of lovable, it's kind of annoying, but they're going to go far because they just own you. They come up with professors that I mean this, I mean that. And others who grew up slightly differently, most of them on financial aid, who are much less entitled. And I think one of the big challenges is to make them entitled because they're at a disadvantage. And so I think a lot of the subjective sentiment of a citizen in America today has to do with that. How entitled are you? How able you are to walk around not being scared? We're not going to go on the race direction right now. But it's going to be a very strong effect. You read Tennessee Code. You train to be careful. It's a very different attitude from others. So I think there's a lot of research on this. I think a lot of it is not randomly controlled in some deep way. But that's where clinical comes in. But there's no doubt that the work on the poor, at least, is that they are aware of the fact that there's an image there. And by the way, they buy it. They do think they're less capable, just like the rest of us. They do think they're less able, just like the rest of us. They actually buy it. If you look at welfare recipients, we have a terrible scare on welfare recipients. Welfare recipients have it too. So it's not that you are immune to it. You're part of the same story.
Okay, I'm John Gillespie. I'm a psychologist and a retired administrator at Fordham. It seems to me from what you were saying, I was thinking of the contrast between the poverty level and the minimum and the
Living wage.
living wage. Yes, thank you. It would seem to me that the program design is important, but if you aren't closing the gap between the living wage and the poverty level with your social safety net, the design is, you are still going to be left with the problem of scarcity and inability to devote attention and organize it correctly. So a large part of the problem is just enriching the social safety net.
Look, the scarcity challenge that you experience is a function not just of your income, but of the ease or difficulty of conducting everyday life. So what do? You either give people more money, not either or. You give people more money and you facilitate the juggling. Those are two things that basically go hand in hand. Here's a very different perspective. Remember I talked about the suitcase, big or small. How do I fit more things in my suitcase with slack? Capitalism says get a bigger suitcase. And Buddhism basically says you want fewer things. Both will work in the same direction. Now, what you cannot do with the American poor is tell them, develop more modest taste. They've done all they can. So now the question is just make a bigger suitcase and produce bigger, higher income. And I totally agree. The minimum wage is too low. I think universal basic income is a fantastic idea, so all that. And in addition, you want to facilitate the everyday juggling, because clearly even if you went to the living wage way, an impossible dream at the moment, you'd still have juggling issues which would make life a lot easier to facilitate. Now obviously, by the way, everything that's happening in the last couple of years has been in the wrong direction. So if you look at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was one of our hopes, to pursue criminal payday lenders and do other kind of stuff, that literally officially dropped all the lawsuits against payday lenders in the last year. So all that's probably even bigger, but I agree with you.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Swanker. I'm studying International Development and Economics here at Fordham. So I'm just wondering what, for international development practitioners, how you think that this type of study of scarcity and behavioral psychology should change or impact the field of research and project design.
To me, a person is a person, so it could be developing or it could be in the future market, the same idea. You know, for example, if you look at some of Esther Duflo's work on providing fertilizer to farmers. So it's a classic case of if I fail to smooth, if I run out of money too quickly, you know, I sell my sugar from sugarcane or something else and I have a lot of money, but I don't need fertilizer until much later. And by then, I don't have any more money, and I can't afford a fertilizer, which would make me a lot richer. So now, what they do is they introduce programs where I buy the fertilizer when I'm rich, and get it later when I'm poor, but I buy it when it's easy. These nuances that, you know, in standard economic models, there's no, you know, I have a certain amount of money and I spend it, and that doesn't make a difference. Here, thinking this way can really make a big difference. So even, you know, I talk about messaging something to somebody, you want to pay attention to your message about health or anything else. Messaging it when they just got paid and have more mental space is probably more effective than messaging it when they're preoccupied and running out. So I think similar intuitions have now been explored in developing contexts, for example, where energy plays a important role.
Hi, Howard. I want to first thank you so much for talking about this topic. You know, I'm an immigrant. When I came to this country, I came into a community where no one talked about money. It was a wealthy community, and I was taught really young, you can't talk about how much money you have, how much money you don't have. So I think broaching this topic and researching it is really important. It's really essential for change. I wanted to ask you a question about, you know, with the sugarcane farmers, those were the same individuals that you tested when they were rich and in that year, later on in that year poor. And I guess I have a question about if there would be different effects for people who grew up extremely poor, but then later in life become rich. Do you see any do you know any research that?
It's a question that I often get, and I just don't know what to say about it. So here's what I know. I know that we don't know to predict how people will go. So look, we've all seen people who grew up poor and now they're new Gorlish and they wear Gucci and they travel on Bulgarian and flamboyantly rich. And then people just like them who grew up poor and still walk around modest with bread in their pocket. What makes one as opposed to the other, I think we don't know. Maybe the clinical experts will know more, but I think we really don't know. You know, when I was a kid, I grew up in a school in Israel, and we used to have substitute teachers with numbers from camps. And I remember I was 8, and I remember it's so weird. Half of them would be perpetually depressed, and the other half were clowns. And they both graduated from the same hell. And the question is, what makes that happen? And I think with poverty is a very similar thing. I don't think we know. I don't know. Anyway, I haven't met somebody who will tell me, here's what predicts. And I think a lot of people who are poor have the memories, but either they do all they can to get over them and drive up Bulgarian, or they respect them and keep them.
I guess I was more interested in the cognitive impact in terms of, is it still a preoccupation even when you have the wealth? I mean, the outcome and the behavior, whether you spend it or you save it or whatever, but I had a client who was so preoccupied about not having food, even though she was very, very wealthy at that point in her life, but because she was traumatized by, you know, a childhood of extreme poverty, it was constantly on her mind.
Yeah, no, again, the trauma is not my rubric. So look, there's a lot of work I haven't discussed, which I don't know as well, about brain development, for example. So we actually know brains develop differently for infants in poverty. So, and that's long lasting. Now, a lot of behavioral effects if we do better later in life. But what I'm talking about, these cognitive load issues are really on-off. There's nothing chronic about that. When you're keeping the 7 digits in your head, you're busy, and when you stop, you're less. And so what I'm focusing on is very much cognitive capacity that's independent of brain development and independent of trauma. These are all long-lasting effects that are really different. So all of which play a role, no doubt, but I'm really focusing on the purely the cognitive effects of just being busy managing this thing. And trauma is no doubt a big part of the life of those who are in poverty.
I think that concludes our talk.